smile in his voice. He didn't care. Boy or girl, the child was a product of our love and devotion. A perfect being from the mold our hearts had created long ago, as it nestled and grew inside of my belly. It was the happiest 9 months of misery one could ever hope to experience. I was the one who chose his name. Edward Sr. insisted it was old-fashioned, and he detested the thought of the ridicule our child might endure for having something so traditional as he had when he was a child. But Edward it was. He looked like an Edward to me, like half Ed, and half me, and the complete incarnation of an unfathomable creation. Edward was perfection. He was the light that had shone into my soul. He radiated life and innocence, with his shining green eyes and rowdy bronze hair. All he had to do was smile, and Ed and I were inclined to give him whatever he wanted. Not that he ever took advantage of that. Even as a small child he showed an amazing amount of care and integrity. That was the thing about my Edward. He had a bigger heart than he knew what to do with. He was sharp and witty, and could go anywhere in this world with his amazing gifts of intelligence and compassion. He was Ed and I multiplied infinitely. Every mother must have such notions regarding her child, but it was different with Edward and me. We were closer than others, bound that night as I rocked him lovingly, and hummed him that same old lullaby my mother hummed to me, when I was but a child. We gave him only the best. The best education, the best clothing, the best music lessons, the best everything. Because he deserved no less. And giving him those things made us happy and content. A happy family. So on that windy night in May when I got the call about the house fire, my world came crashing down around me. I wanted to scream as I stood outside the burning ruins of our happy home. But no sounds escaped my mouth and I simply sank to my knees on the dark gravel of the road. There were flashing lights and sirens as people scurried about our lawn. But all I could do was watch, while everything I loved burned and billowed up into the dark sky. It was our anniversary. I wanted to cry, but I was unaware if the tears ever managed to escape my wide, terror-stricken eyes. The darkness that the weight of the grief brought upon my soul threatened to drag me under and hold me down. And I welcomed the peace of its relief as I felt the thread that held me to this plane sever irrevocably. I grumbled on the hard ground and watched my happy family go up in flames. That's when I saw him. A tall fireman in sooty yellow garb running from the yard with the child in his arms. Not the child. My light. My Edward. He had survived the fire that was raging furiously before me. It was in that moment that I saw his bare, black feet dangling against the background of the burning house, that I knew I had to push it back. No matter how impossible it may have seemed, I had to hold the grief in for his sake alone. I had to stand up and take the steps to the gurney they were lowering his body onto. He was barely conscious, as he lay in his cinched pajamas. They were burned from his chest and stomach, and the sight of the charred flesh, that was melting, and blistering his soft and innocent skin made me retch violently beside the parked ambulance. The people were speaking to me as I fought to regain control of my bodily functions and walk closer, but I didn't hear them. The only thing visible to me was Edward's tear-stained, sooty face, and his cinched bronze locks, as they loaded him into the back of the ambulance. I went in with him. And not because I was told to, or asked to, and not even because I needed to know he was okay, though that instinct was surely ever present in my mind. I went with him to hum him to sleep when they sedated him. I stroked his ashen hair and kept my eyes away from the ministrations of the paramedics, as he was lulled into unconsciousness by the sedatives. As they worked on him behind the closed doors of a triage room, the authorities relayed to me the story of the fire, and the fate of my husband. They gave me the most gruesome details regarding the condition of his charred remains. Details that would stick with me and haunt my memories for years to come. Edward was in the hospital for only 2 nights, and I truly wish I could say that the job of caring for him was enough to keep my mind occupied and away from the overwhelming grief of losing my husband and soulmate. But it was still there. I fought it back, and swallowed it down with every ounce of control I had as I tended to my light, but it still swelled inside of me and threatened to pull me under and into the darkness of my hopelessness. My Edward suffered greatly for it. I was meant to care for him, and mend his wounds, however physical or emotional they may have been. But my own wounds injured us both, and I was unfit every time the darkness crept into my mind and I gazed into his flat, green eyes. It didn't take long for me to realize this grief was inevitable. It would eat away at my soul indefinitely, pulling me down and transforming me into a broken shell that could barely function under the weight of it. It would bleed out of me and infect those I was dear to, as they made every attempt to pick me up. It would destroy them every moment that I remained under. Edward would grow up while watching me suffer, and in turn he would too. He'd spend his childhood caring for his broken mother, and seeing the remnants of what she had been slip away from him. It would break him, and dim that spark that I held so dear. And I absolutely refused to let that darkness take my light. He was too special and too pure to allow such a blasphemous thing to desecrate him. It was at the funeral that I had made up my mind. I bowed my head over my husband's casket and I swore that I would do everything in my power to assure Edward had the best chance for a happy future. The only way to make such a vow was to sacrifice. To send him to someone better. Someone whole who couldn't poison him. That night, we slept at Ed's parents' large country home. I hadn't come Edward to sleep like I usually did, and he came downstairs, likely seeking me out as I sat at the kitchen table, and drowned my grief in the stale vodka from the never-used liquor cabinet of the Mason home. It was torture to deny my child this one last thing. To hold him in my arms and hum him my song, and watch as he drifted to sleep peacefully. But I knew if I went up those stairs and held him I wouldn't be able to let go. So I remained where I sat as I told him, without looking him in the eye in fear, that the grief would show, and the darkness would penetrate, and desecrate my light. When the words left my mouth as I gazed down into my glass, I realized he would need consoling for this. He wouldn't understand the logic, and the sacrifice I was making, and he would hurt for it. It angered me that I couldn't be the person to ease that pain in him. It would fade with time, hopefully. And I prayed to whatever God it was I worshipped, that his new family would make it up to him, and give him the happy home I could no longer provide. I made the arrangements before the Masons could even figure it out. They would want to keep him for themselves, and that wasn't good enough. I would still know where he was, and the pull to see him every day would be far too strong to resist. And most importantly, they battled their own darkness from the loss of their child. It wasn't good enough for him. Once he was taken away by the caseworkers of the state, I left their home, without another word to the aging and grieving couple. I couldn't bear the accusation in their eyes as I drove away from the country in my car, alone. I let the bustle of the city hide me as I drifted from one shabby motel room to the next. Always with the one item that granted me the numbness to face the darkness, and take it into myself wholly. I was drinking with purpose and intention every day that I made a trip to a corner store, or a busy market. I had considered suicide many lonely nights as I lay in a comforting the uncomfortable bed. The urge to do so was at times overwhelming. Just the thought alone of being able to see him again. I didn't know if I could consider myself a deeply religious woman. But my family had brought me up with certain beliefs and morals that I abided by faithfully. I wasn't quite sure if there was a heaven, if I would even be allowed admittance into such a place. But Ed and I were two parts of a whole, and I knew deep in my heart that I would go where he was. He was waiting for me somewhere up there, and I was ready to meet him. Few things held me back. Mostly fear. Fear that I wouldn't do it right, and I'd just end up injured, and waited on in some second-rate hospital, in the bad part of the city. There was also a fear that such a sin would banish me from that heaven. I wasn't deeply religious, but I wasn't taking any chances where Ed was concerned either. So I drank myself into stupor after stupor on a daily basis, and if God was compelled to explore the semantics of my intentions and actions, he may have thought it to be suicide anyways. Of course, even though I knew better, I couldn't find the strength to disapprove when I downed a bottle greedily and welcomed the darkness. Those were the times of night, when the darkness had consumed my ever fiber, that I allowed my thoughts to drift to my light. I wondered where Edward was, and how he was doing. If his grades were good, and what the couple was like who was caring for him. I wondered if he ever grew to like sports, when he was old enough, or if he still kept up with his piano lessons. Most of all, I wondered if he was happy. I prayed for it, longed for it, begged the darkness relentlessly for it. I allowed myself grand illusions of his normal daily routines and habits. I imagined that he was somewhere smiling at that exact moment, and it always made the sleep that the darkness plunged me into that much more peaceful because of it. Of course, I had no way of knowing really. I couldn't count the number of times I had to restrain myself from seeking out his exact location. I would reason that I needed just one look at his face, or 1 second to hear his voice. Just one glance to see how tall he had grown, or what parts of it had appeared with his maturing features. He would surely be just as dashing, if not more so. I remained good on my vow throughout the years however, and I never strayed from the path the darkness would inevitably force and shove me into daily. I could do no such thing and commit no such betrayal. My Edward would be 17 on this night. I never kept track of time or dates, but I always made sure to realize how he was growing into a man. And as I lay in my bed with the approaching darkness daring to drag me under and tuck me into my glorious nothingness, I imagined that he was laughing, and bright like the silver moon that softly illuminated the peeling walls of my shattered and dank oblivion. My slumber greeted me with that same magnificent vision, that transcended my darkness just enough to allow me a small grin, as the empty bottle dropped from my hand, and bounced off the grimy carpet, with a gentle thud. Because somewhere out there in the world, my light was shining brilliantly among the twinkling stars of the clear midnight,